You know what that reminds me of?
What's that?
What we didn't do today.
Last week we were unable to record our normal videos since we were both out of town separately.
Right.
And instead, we took some time individually to look at the idea of plot and what it takes to craft a plot and to make a compelling plot. And we're going to share what we each found individually and discuss that and see what ideas we can glean from our own individual efforts in looking at that. So Dad, why don't you start off and tell them what you did to look into plot.
Okay, I've been going through a Coursera course called The Craft of Plot, and it is part of their creative writing specialization. And just here are some of the high-level bullet points. I talked earlier in some of the previous videos about having the bones of a story, but not being able to connect them together with joints to make a plot. Some of that came from this course, but here are just some of the highlights of the course that I took from Coursera. One of the interesting things was that one person had said that there are really only two plots. One of them is a character goes on a journey, and the other is someone comes to town. And any kind of a plot is really about that, one of those two experiences. And the journey may be physical or the journey may be internal, but those are the two plots. And then what drives the plot is not fate, or what makes a good plot. It's not going to be driven by fate, but it's going to be driven by the will of the character. The character has to do something. Many times they refer to it as a character having agency. So that's one thing that is important for plot. Then really the third thing is that there isn't any one particular magic structure that a plot needs to follow. There were several different structures that were presented in the course. One of them was Freytag's pyramid, which includes exposition, then an inciting incident, then rising action, then the climax, and then the falling action, and finally resolution to whatever the inciting incident was, and then some French word, denouement, or
denouement, I think is
the denouement. Whatever it's
That's what it
called.
looks like. Yes.
Right. The denouement, whatever, however you say that in French. That's probably the most complicated structure that we had. One of them was a much simpler version of that is used when pitching the story. And that uses the inciting incident, a character, a conflict, and a quest. And it structures itself in a sentence that says, when an inciting incident happens to the character, they have to overcome some sort of a conflict or set of obstacles in order to complete whatever the quest is. Aristotle, on the other hand, went very, very simple. He has a 3-act structure, which is, get this, you might want to write this down. The first act is called beginning. The middle act is called middle. And the last act is called end. Very, very profound, but very simple. And then there was also a 5-act structure that was sort of more like Freytag's pyramid, and that they call it the ABDCE structure: action, background, development, climax, and ending. But summary of all that is there's no one right way to write a story, but there are some good frameworks. And that was pretty much my summary of what I got out of the Coursera course.
All right. My research was a little less structured. I didn't go through a full course, but rather kind of looked at a bunch of different people's articles from different writers and different writing groups to get their tips on the things that they thought were important about creating a good plot, and especially some of the things that some of the authors said, this is something that I struggled with when I started out, and here is what I learned and I wish I had known earlier when it comes to crafting a really good plot.
Those are helpful.
It is very helpful to look at that and to see, especially with us being early writers, no one book written yet. So kind of some of it, the first part, I guess, kind of more broad, like yours was start simple with a compelling premise.
Mm.
So have a clear central conflict and have a structure that you're going to follow. So whether that's the 3-act, one of the 2 5-acts, or whatever you choose, have some structure that you know you're going to follow, and have
It was when you talk about a simple premise, it almost feels like that pitch or synopsis.
Yes.
That feels like the kind of thing that can help us craft a simple premise.
Right. Even if the plot gets really complex later on, have a simple premise so you know you're going to stay on track. And then when it comes to like actually writing, and kind of getting that plot down in more detail, one of the things that they said was create curiosity and raise questions.
Mm.
And so they gave 2 examples in the one article that I was reading. It was, why did that guy hide that gun?
Mm.
The other one was, why did that woman in a bridal dress get out of the car at the stop sign and run away?
Mm. You know what that reminds me of?
What's that?
What we didn't do today. We said we were going to do that at the beginning of each of these videos, and we've completely forgot. But hey, that's why we have good reminders. Right?
Exactly, yeah. So create curiosity and raise questions. Another big one was follow internal logic. So the characters all need to be motivated by something.
Oh, okay.
And one of the examples they gave was the book 1984.
Okay.
In that book, the government has like all the power.
Mm-hmm.
It's an all-powerful entity that is the government. They have complete control. And because they have complete control, and they're trying to keep complete control, there should be a reason that they want this complete control. So therefore they should be using that complete control in the book.
I see.
And so if you have people, characters, agencies that have something that they want, they should use that.
You have something I want.
Yes.
Okay.
When a character gets something that they want, they should then use that thing to keep the plot moving forward and make sure that everything is cohesive. When you're writing, and I guess kind of more brainstorming and storyboarding, I guess, each scene needs to have a purpose. And whether that's character development or moving the plot forward or just giving you more information about something and thickening the plot. Each scene needs to have a purpose, because if you don't have a purpose in your scene, the reader is going to get bored.
So something else about scenes, in what I've been reading, is that each scene needs to be consistently from one particular character's perspective. It's okay to have multiple main characters, but whenever you're in a given scene, wherever those boundaries are, it all needs to be from the perspective of what that person can observe, and not head hopping from what one person is thinking to what other person is thinking, what they're deciding about what's going on.
Yes. Another thing was plan subplots. So you've got your overarching thing that you decide at the very beginning. Here's big picture what our story is going to be, but also figure out what the subplots are going to be and make sure that they're relevant to your main plot. So similar to the scenes themselves, your subplots can, give you more information about the character, can show character development. They can complicate the main plot, have interesting relationships between the characters in those subplots. But you need to have good subplots to help make the regular plot even more interesting.
Total change of subject, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but something that I just learned that we should probably pay attention to is to not record videos like this while the washing machine is going and shaking the house. Sorry about the jiggling of the video. Sorry, back to where you were.
Alrighty. Similar to something I mentioned earlier, every character should want something, and should act to that desire. I think it was Kurt Vonnegut, a writer, that said every character has desires and has fears. And so even the minor character who shows up for one page and you never see them again, that character has desires, that character has fears, things that they want. And that can help determine how the plot moves forward. Don't just use a character as a way to get from point A to point B, but respect them as a character and as a person. That's one of the things that I noticed. Just briefly, we were in our meeting beforehand. You pulled up a little portion of the story that I had written back in high school, and there's a secretary at a police station. And when I was writing that, I was using that secretary as the means for the main character to get in contact with the sheriff. And that was the only thing that secretary was there for. I didn't take into account why she chose to be there, why that secretary, or what she wanted, anything like that. And so the whole interaction between the main characters and the secretary was to get them to the sheriff, and not taking into account anything else that was going on. And kind of along the lines of characters having their desires, when it comes time for the resolution, the characters themselves need to be the one that resolve it. And you should not have a Deus ex machina. You familiar with that phrase?
I think I remember seeing what it looks like.
Okay.
But I have never taken the time to figure out what the Latin phrase means.
Okay. Deus ex machina is a Latin phrase that means God from the machine.
Oh, okay.
And it is based on kind of a Greek idea of what a lot of Greek plays would have, where things are really bad, people are about to die, and all of a sudden, this machine, like a crane that they would use like a crane to bring a character in, or like a trapdoor to bring them up, and this character comes in that's the Greek god, and they make everything right.
Oh, I see.
And one of the examples, I don't remember what play it was, but this woman is like about to sacrifice herself so that way her lover can still survive, or something like that.
Okay.
And like she's in the process of, she's currently dying, and then this god comes in and brings her back to life, and everything is good, and they live happily ever after. So in that example, they didn't solve the problem.
Right.
This god came out and fixed it. And so the idea of Deus ex machina is all of a sudden this thing came out of nowhere and set things right. And one example of that was War of the Worlds.
Oh, the virus.
The virus, yeah. The aliens are attacking Earth. They're about to take over. All of a sudden, unbeknownst to anyone, there's this virus that people are, I guess, mostly harmless to people, but affects the aliens. The aliens die out, and all of a sudden people are saved, and it's not because of anything that the people did.
Much like in the Coursera course, and every time I say Coursera course, I think I'm about to say Triceratops. And anyway, sorry for planting that sound in your head. But they talked about that the plot should be driven by the will of the characters and not by fate. It's about having agency.
Yeah, it definitely connects there. One last thing, and this was an author talking about what in her mind were the 3 things that you need to figure out when creating a plot. First one was challenge. And specifically, what is the challenge to the status quo?
Okay.
So whether that's you have to go on a journey, or a stranger comes to town, there's something that challenges the status quo, or the inciting incident. Next thing would be conflict. And one of the big things that she said in this point was be meaner to your characters.
Ooh.
When you're writing and you get to know a character, it's easy to not want to put them through the hard things.
That's funny that you say that, because as we've been working on some of the secondary main characters, I have started noticing that I'm starting to get attached to them.
No, I don't want them to go through that.
Yes.
But what she said was readers will care more about your characters when you put them through difficulties.
Wow. Interesting.
It gives the characters more depth. And then this ties into her third point, which is characters. They need to be relatable. You need, whether that's because their status quo is familiar to you, or the challenges that they're going through afterwards are familiar to you. The way that they think, you can relate to that. It helps to create empathy. And one of the things that kind of ties into, that I saw multiple times throughout all my research, was the importance of character to plot.
Okay.
Because plot is different than just story. Story is this happened, then this happened. typical example is story is the king died, then the queen died. Plot is the king died, then the queen died from sadness.
Mm.
And that you're dealing more with characters, causality, and things like that. And in order to have a good plot, you have to have good characters. And so is a lot of interconnectedness between plot and character.
The idea, the entire concept of why happens inside people.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
The people making choices that make things harder, all the conflict that happens inside the character's own desires. And because the villain and the hero have different desires or have different thoughts about how this same desire should be reached, you end up with a significant connection between plot and character. And I think that's all we have for you this week. That was our discussion on what we learned about plot. If you have some things that you think are beneficial for us to think about when it comes to plot, whether that's high level creating a plot or more in the details, writing it down and figuring out what that looks like in story form, let us know down in the comments, and we will see you next week.